My name's Sam Van Leer. I'm president and founder of Urban Paradise Guild, and these are my colleagues Dave and Patrick. And they've discovered something remarkable that is in need of protection so that we can develop new ways of looking at the ocean, new resources, and new economic engines. So they know it better than anybody else, so I'm going to let them do the describing. So Dave, tell us about your discovery.
Sure. So over COVID, we sort of stumbled on, in our free outdoor time, a nearshore coral reef right off of the busiest section of Miami Beach. It's a really quick, brief swim. And as people that really like to dive, Patrick and I started going out there like almost every day and found endangered species and all sorts of just an amazing, vibrant part of Coral's reef tract, Florida's coral reef tract, that extends right into our backyard. And we started thinking about that this area needs to be protected, and how do we leverage something that is so close to us, that's accessible for people to visit, and how can this be turned into a park that more people can experience, but also that we can bring protection to, because as we know, Florida's reefs are not doing well. They're sort of, you could describe it as an ecological collapse. We're down to single-digit coral coverage across the reef. 270 acres of coral were killed during the port deep dredge project from a few years ago. There we have overfishing, we have boat anchor damage, all sorts of things impacting this really endangered ecosystem on a macro level.
And then on top of that, we have climate crisis. So we have higher sea surface temperatures, which are causing coral bleaching. We have ocean acidification, which is removing calcium from the water that's used as building blocks by oysters and clams and corals and just the whole ecosystem. So why don't y'all tell us some of the stuff you've seen out there?
Yeah. So even with all of those perils that the reef is facing, there's still a lot of great biodiversity that we're able to see right in our backyard. Some of our favorite residents are nurse sharks, whether it's juvenile pups that look like they're just hatched and still have their blue spots, to sharks that are 3 feet long, to all the way to 6 feet. We've seen one time now there too. And if we're really lucky, we get to see some of the endangered green sea turtles that Dave talked about, usually juvenile, taking their time growing up on the reef before heading out to the reefs that are further offshore. And two of the pretty unique fish that we get to see out there too are guitarfish and lesser electric rays, which I've never seen anywhere but off of our near-shore reef. And those are both in the ray family, and they have ray-like bodies, like when you think of your typical stingray, and then shark-like tails. So they're pretty funky looking, and just some cool neighbors that we have out there.
Yeah. What are some of the most colorful things you've seen out there?
Oh, let's see, porkfish, which have these bright yellow and black stripes. Those are pretty cool to see. We see angelfish, whether it's queen angelfish or the gray angelfish, which it's pretty cool because you get to see them from their juvenile stage, where they're all sorts of bright colors, and then when they grow up, they can look like a completely different fish. So it's kind of cool to see them transition throughout their life out there.
So what do you think this potential is economically for Miami Beach?
So Miami Beach doesn't take advantage of a lot of ecotourism today. But this nearshore reef, which is very rare to have a reef growing this close to shore, is the opportunity to really turn our off-season into a dive season. Dive tourism in Miami is not very high up on the list. Most people pass us over for Key Largo or Fort Lauderdale or some of the northern counties. But this reef shows that in a highly populated area that's a really popular tourist destination already in the wintertime, that there's some really awesome ecotourism opportunities, and to turn this into a popular dive site for people to learn about Florida's coral reef, to become advocates for Florida's coral reef, and help demand more action on the climate in general.
Yeah. And so it's really exciting because summertime, which is when we have fewer storms generally, it's when the water is clear, it's the quality of the dive that matters. You've got great visibility out there in the summertime, which is, of course, when hotels and restaurants tend to be emptier. So this has the potential to really open up a whole new avenue for Miami Beach, especially at a point where they want to make it more family friendly, and this is pretty friendly. So what's the closest point between the reef and shore?
Just a few hundred feet. So if you remember where the buoys that mark the no vessel area as they are presently, the reef's really just on the other side of those. So it's a quick, easy, couple of minute swim for a diver or a snorkeler. This is instead of booking a charter boat, showing up super early in the morning, getting your Coast Guard safety briefing, and being taken out to the much more distant barrier reef. Instead of being able to have a little bit more independent, quick swim, and you're in with the cute nurse sharks and the manatees and the eagle rays, just right off the beach.
And the shallowest part of the reef, what's that versus the deepest?
So this probably goes from the reef crest, it goes up to about 15 feet. And then the deepest part of the reef is probably in the 20-ish area, which is cool both because it makes it a really easy dive to have a long dive because you don't use very much air at that depth. But you also, snorkelers on the surface, they can see shallow reef because there's not that much water to look through. So normally when you do a coral snorkel, they're taking you out to reefs that are typically in more of the 30-foot range, and the water clarity has to be really clear to be able to see through 30 feet. Here, even on an average day, it can be a really good snorkel.
Yeah, and all that extra light means that the colors really pop.
Absolutely.
For photography.
The photography is just exceptional.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
colorful.
So a little correction for you scuba people. Skin divers are just fine with 30 feet of water and diving down to that,
Right.
if they're experienced. So people skin diving could enjoy everything about the reef. So what are the kinds of protections that you think are necessary?
So because it's a shore accessible area, it means that you're going to be swimming to it. So it's going to be divers with dive flags. This means that boats are a potential problem, right? And boats are a potential problem for the divers and the snorkelers that are on the surface that even with a flag are just a head in the water looks like a coconut. It's not very large. But also these vessels are anchoring on the reef. It's a largely unknown, uncharted area just on the other side of the vessel exclusion zone as it is today. So it's a very convenient place for someone to drop anchor. One anchor drop can rip out an endangered brain coral that took 150 years to grow, in 2 seconds.
And because it's not marked currently, the boaters don't even know that they're destroying the reef. So it's important to have clear delineation of, hey, don't park your boat here, and let's do some protections.
So one of the things we've discussed is the environmental value of the reef. So economically, wow. But environmentally, there are corals there that are surviving bleaching events, and they're in shallow water, which is pretty hot.
Yes.
So these are resilient survivor corals. So it sounds like we've got a phenomena here that's similar to the corals in Government Cut, where there are hybrid corals that were discovered there, hybrid of two native corals, staghorn and elkhorn, that are living there and surviving in extreme conditions. And so we might have a real environmental gold mine of value that could have an implication for reefs throughout Florida.
Absolutely. The last summer we recorded temperatures in excess of 92 degrees on this nearshore reef. And while some of the brain coral did bleach, all of the brain coral bounced back after that prolonged bleaching season. And a lot of the other species of star coral didn't bleach at all, which implies that we have some pretty special genetic individuals living in this nearshore space. Being a coral living close to shore can be a hard life. This is where the surf crashes. So perhaps over these last couple hundred years, for a variety of reasons, some really hardy coral animals picked this spot. And you're right, these could be the species of coral that we can use in other places for conservation efforts.
Natural selection has amazing pressure, and it tells us what the survivors are if we ask. So it does seem that there are a number of other threats as well. So one is, for example, sunblock. So currently, as far as I know, there's no restrictions on what sunblocks can be used on the beach. And it sounds like that's something that we should reconsider.
The busiest beach in probably the busiest beach in the United States, depending on the day, means a lot of people getting into that water with sunblock on, right? And we want to make sure this is not toxic to coral sunblock. Because imagine if we have the perfect genetic specimen that could save Florida and it gets killed from somebody's SPF 50.
Yeah, that would be a bummer. That would be quite the bummer. So another thing that's exciting is the potential for it environmentally and recreationally as a fish bank, as a protected area. So why don't you talk a little bit about how you think that might work?
So this small area, because it would be a vessel exclusion area, we'd also want to make it an area that people don't fish right on the reef crest. So that would be no spear fishing and no line fishing. There are a lot of other reefs just a little bit further offshore for the fishermen to use. But because we're hoping that this could become a really educationally busy area, because it's so close, it's an opportunity to bring a lot of people out to see the reef. And making sure there's as many fish for these divers to enjoy as possible, make it as pretty as possible, make this a little fish bank, as you said, which will then help the fishermen in all the neighboring coral locations, because these juvenile fish that seem to really like this nearshore spot will live, more of them will survive to grow up to be big adults that could then be part of the commercial fisheries for the rest of Florida.
Or the recreational.
Or the recreational.
Yeah, I mean, the South Point Pier is just around the corner in Government Cut, and it gives a great place for people to do shore fishing. So it doesn't have to be about exclusive access and stuff like that. You know, as many people as can should be able to benefit from this.
Right.
So
the fishing on this, beautiful South Point Pier should become even better with the protections that we get from this park.
Yeah.
And it's all about the accessibility, right? And that it's an easy place to fish on South Point Pier, and it's an incredibly easy place to dive or snorkel as well.
Yeah, it's. I'm really looking forward to exploring it myself.
And by
go ahead.
And by keeping those activities separated, it's safer and more enjoyable for everyone. So if you're out there snorkeling with your family, you don't have to worry about running into a fishing hook or, God forbid, a spearfishing accident. So you'll still be able to do some of those activities. They're just in different zones.
Yeah, and keeping blood out of the water when people are in the water is a good way to keep the sharks from getting too aggressive, frisky. Yeah. And I think anybody who's spent time in the water wants to feel as safe as possible around the fauna and the flora. So what an exciting place. So we've also talked a bit about mooring buoys, for example. So why don't you talk a little bit about what that might look like?
So right now, the vessel exclusion area is right on the inside of the reef. So the reef is not part of that protected area. So our idea, to also be inclusive of the boaters, would be to move the vessel exclusion area to the far side of the reef, but then supplement that with mooring buoys as well. So people that coming from the ocean side would have a good, safe place to tie up, would have easy access to the reef, but we would be ensuring that there would be no anchor damage or the possibility of a snorkeler or a diver and a boat propeller having an unfortunate meeting.
Yeah, and I think that it might be a wise thing to set up buoys on the inside just for paddlecraft so that people can bring their stand-up paddleboard or kayak. That's how you guys discovered it, right?
Yeah, so that's how we found it. We were paddleboarding off the beach during COVID, just enjoying the beauty of a flat summer day and seeing, oh, hey, there's coral down there. And we would use sort of our paddleboards as a sort of dive platform to work off of. So having a place to tie up so that you can leave your paddleboard and when you come back, it's still there. As well as the possibility to have a buoy for a tired swimmer or something like that, to be able to hold on to something for a second.
Well, we're also brainstorming about ways of opening the space up to divers who are less experienced, especially children and older people. So having resting areas is probably going to need to be something that we plan for.
The whole beauty of this space is that it's accessible. So we really wanted to lean into that and how do we make this work for everybody?
Okay, cool. So how can people help?
So they can get involved with UPG.
That's a great idea.
We have a whole policy team that's been really pushing on this and engaging at multiple levels. There's a lot of different jurisdictions and a lot of different government entities that have interests out here. And so we're working on different applications and different means of delivering these protections to the reef as soon as possible.
And there are other ways to get involved in policy too, which you'll hear more about on other videos. How complicated is it to create a marine protected area? What are the barriers and the steps that you're running into?
So the entire Florida Reef Tract runs from Martin County to the Dry Tortugas. And there's a lot of different agencies involved at each different point along this path. And there's a lot of different complexities in getting protection at different parts. So the southern half is the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, which has a lot of cool levers to protect different parts of special areas of the reef. They're called Special Protected Areas, SPAs. You then have Biscayne National Park as we get closer to the reef that we're talking about here, but we're not in Biscayne National Park. North of Biscayne National Park, we have the 𝗕𝗲𝗰𝗵𝗳 Coral Conservation Area. That is a state of Florida protected entity, and it has the least protections of the three areas that we've talked about. It also has the fewest levers to pull. So because it's a new concept for them, it's a less mature protected area, we are going to be working with the state as well as the local municipalities in the county to create essentially the state version of these federal special protected areas. So once you would create a special protected area to make this a marine park, you would want to align all of the jurisdictions together, having sort of like memorandums of understanding for who's going to do what. So City of Miami Beach has their, lifeguards that ocean rescue that are eyes on the water. They also have the police marine patrol. The county has marine patrols. And then you get into state, the fish and wildlife entities, as well as the 𝗕𝗲𝗰𝗵𝗳 people that monitor this area. And then the federal people also are involved through NOAA. So it's going to be sort of aligning all of these players, getting everybody on the same page to create sort of a cohesive marine park in this area to really celebrate it. And then what's cool is once we figure this out, there's a lot of other special areas within along the state waters here too. This could potentially become a repeatable concept that we could have.
So creating a precedent for protection.
Correct.
Outstanding. And simple.
And
not.
simple. So easy.
Not.
Yes.
Now, anything worth doing is worth investing the time in. So, guys, thanks so much for your discovery and for your leadership on this. And we look forward to getting it done.
Yeah, thanks, Sam.
Why don't you guys point over at the reef?
So the reef is right over there, just a few hundred feet off the beach, off in the distance. Our nurse shark friends, they're there every time we dive. We see our same little buddies. They're always excited to see us. If you look close enough, I'm sure you can see them.
And this is off on the other side of Miami Beach, not on the bay side. But there's amazing stuff in the bay too, which you're going to hear about.